Good morning, it's Simon here from Patchpool. This is the first tutorial for PPG Phonem, a vocal synthesizer coded by Wolfgang Palm. And I want to show you around and explain some basic functions and necessary steps before you start making your own sounds. So, when you first open Phonem, this is what you see. There's a preset selected from the factory library, and the first step you should take is go into the folder of the resources. Phonem comes with this kind of setup. I'm using this on a Mac. And so you see Phonem, then you have here the resources folder, and you should create a new folder there with your name or your dog's name or your favorite food, whatever. You see I created my own resources folder, and it's full of utterances and stuff. Then you will be able to save your own phonemes into the user base, which is here, because you can't save anything into the factory folders. That's always seems to be a confusing thing. If you want to save something, you should first select your own resources folder, like this. Then the next necessary step is to go into the browser. By default, the one of the factory banks is activated, but we actually want to create a fresh bank so we can save our own things. So we do this on the right side. So let's just create a new bank and name it video tutorials. Bam. So now you go to the left side and activate this sound bank. Here it is. It's of course empty. Another important thing to remember is that your host always saves the entire bank, which is activated here, so it's actually impossible to lose any sounds. This was updated in one of the recent updates, and it's very helpful because at the beginning of Phonem it was pretty chaotic and things got lost easily. But let's not remember that time. So we have now activated this video tutorial. If you reopen this project later, this bank will be called temporary host bank with a number at the end. So don't get confused. And everything that you will change in that temporary host bank will not have an effect on the actual bank named video tutorials. So you always have to remember to copy it to a bank, copy to target, but let's elaborate on that in another tutorial. So this is an empty bank. We can now actually start making stuff. Let's do something very basic first. We are selecting now a user base. There's several ways of getting started. Let's use this method. Click on new text. No, first let's initialize, of course. Init new. And by default, Phonem offers us the hello world thing. We don't want to listen to that because you all know it already. Now, we immediately go ahead and enter something. Yes, why not video tutorial. I don't know if this is possible. Yes, it is. So, here we have our first
video tutorials.
Yes, thank you. And we have different voices here. This is male voice 1, and each of these voices has a different character, and you will have to try by yourself how different the things sound. Let's do the same with male voice 2. You don't have to re-enter the text, it's still in the buffer, so you just click return.
Video tutorial.
That sounds a bit more pronounced. It's also male voice 2 and female voice 2. If you want to actually produce speech which is sort of understandable, it's advisable to use M1, M2 or F2. So, here we have a click at the beginning, which is due to the fast attack time. So we go to gain envelope here and smoothen the attack. Actually, the click only occurs at the first initializing. Later it's gone. It's an oddity of phoneme. But anyway, we are smoothing it with this envelope. Here's the release time. And the time it takes to scan through these phonemes here is determined by the time envelope, which you see here. So if we drag this, and we can also edit the curves. So now it's fast at the beginning and becomes slower. So now it's scanning through the whole chain once. If you want to create a loop, click on here and use the set loop function. Now you can loop the thing back and forth. So it will now scan through the whole thing, back and forth. Let's make it a bit faster. So now this is one thing, one way of scanning through the utterance chains. Now we're using a different mode, the frame mode, which will actually only play the selected frame. So we could now, for instance, use an LFO or another different envelope or time-synced LFO to scan through the phonemes, but I'll show you that later. First, let's have a look at the single frames. Here's the root key. You see, now if I press a C3, it actually plays a C1. So if you want a normal sort of assignment, that the C3 sounds like a C3, you put this to C5, which is actually the classical description of a C3 in classical music. No, I'm wrong, that would be C1. It's the phoneme way of describing it. So let's leave it up here, C5. And you're seeing here that the blue light is remembering you that you have not yet saved the changes, because as soon as I change something in these utterances, including the root key, it reminds you to save. If your host has an autosave function, you don't really have to bother about it. but it's actually always useful, because now you if you want to keep that in your resources folder, you just click here and save. So the blue light now is not lit anymore. Now let's have a look at each frame. You can now drag the formants around and change each utterance actually. Here you have a cutoff for each amount of aspiration. The whatever that button, I mean that's actually for consonants, how much noise and attack and percussiveness an utterance has. With a vowel it doesn't do anything, of course. And down here it's the excitation, which is the amount of the volume and the shape of the white noise generator, which is now exciting the utterances. You can also use wave tables and re-synthesized sounds, but that's good for another tutorial. So now if you drag this up and down, you see the volume will change. You can also change the shape, which makes it much brighter. So as we now have a static sound, we could use an LFO. Let's go to the matrix, select LFO1, assign that to phoneme position, which is here, position control phoneme 1. Drag it up full. See, now he's asking me to autosave. Okay, yes, let's do an autosave. We're still in the init patch, as you see. We will rename and save that later. Because, as we are now talking about it, every change you apply is automatically stored in the current preset. That's an oddity with Phonem. You don't really have to use a save function when you have finished editing something. This can be confusing and also irritating, because if you have finished a patch and then go on editing that patch because you maybe want to make a variation, you will automatically change the patch you just finished. So that can be frustrating. So you should always use a save as. Let's do that now. So we're naming this video tut 01. And the actual init patch, which we just edited, is here.
Hello world.
Will now revert to the hello world because we haven't saved it. The LFO is now already doing its work. So we want to scan through the utterances with the LFO1. And in this case, we only want to modulate in one direction using the above. So everything above the position is now. So now the LFO is doing this job, you see? You can now increase the speed. And And you also have different shapes. You have a sine shape. You have random and hold, sample and hold, sorry. So it's now randomly scanning through things. And while we're at it, you see these three little thingies here. This means that we have now auto-saved the utterance chain into I mean, the DAW has done that, and so this utterance chain will now not be present in your resources folder, but in a new special folder created by the DAW and by Phonem. So let's have a look, just to explain that. Video tutorials. It's down here. Wait. Here, you see video tutorials, resources, and now this has automatically been saved into a new folder with new names, meaning R0, R1. But actually the utterance which has been saved is this one, which we originally created, video tutorials. Another thing which can be confusing but is also very helpful because it's automatically saving everything you do. So just get used to that. Now let's go back to a normal LFO shape sine. So this is now our sound. If you want to eventually save this for good, you should now create a new bank again and then save copy to target. Because as we are now working in the video tutorials bank, we cannot save into the video tutorials bank, but that's just a minor issue because actually we are now working in a DAW project. So if we reopen this project, this bank will have been renamed to temporary host bank, as I explained earlier. All of this can be confusing, but as soon as you are getting used to Phonem, this will not be an issue anymore. But when you start up, it might confuse you and frustrate you, but don't be. Now, another thing before closing this first tutorial is the possibility to select. Yeah, let's first eliminate that modulation again because we don't want any movement. Now we want to work frame by frame. We can now substitute, for instance, we are now working on the first frame. I showed you these things. Now we can actually go into the library, into the Phonem library, and select consonants, vowels, different things, plosives, fricatives. So here we have a selection of things. So you could actually, let's do that for now. You could create something like, if you want to really start from a single phoneme or a single vowel or something, let's use a female for now. You just enter one vowel, for instance, let's say O, which will leave you with. Now we can delete, for instance, this and we can delete this. Now we are left with exactly one. Why can I not? Oh well, I can't. That's an oddity, but it's like it is. We can now use this as a starting point, and then right-click, copy, and paste, and then sort of build our own utterances based on the first one we have created. Now copy this again. Go to the third frame. So we're now actually creating an overtone transition thing. Copy and paste. You get it? So now we can go back to the time envelope thing. So now it's scanning through the overtones. Now each phoneme has a length parameter. So if you want to smoothen transitions and work on lengths in an utterance chain, these are the buttons to do it. Here's a blend thing. Yes, save it. Blend means how long the transition or crossfade between the utterances will be. And this is the steepness. So the less steep an utterance is, the more smooth the transitions will be. See, it's already smoother. And we might not want to scan through the whole thing, so we just shift the bottom of the envelope, also the top. As this is rather static, we might want to add some vibrato. With the vibrato, it's a dedicated LFO for vibrato. Unfortunately, this cannot be controlled in the mod matrix, so it's either on or off. Of course, you have a heavy amount. But you can achieve similar things by assigning, e.g., for instance, an LFO to pitch. Let's do that. Pitch control, LFO2. Dial it in. Then you dial the gain to 0. And then you can, e.g., assign the mod wheel to intensity of LFO2 here. So now when the modulation wheel is down, there's no modulation. Then when I move it up, put the speed up here and change it to sine. Now we could also assign the speed to aftertouch, for instance, which is the CX parameter, to control the speed of the vibrato. So it's all possible even without the dedicated vibrato LFO. But this one has a sort of a randomized S variation parameter, which is quite useful, and also a delay function. So I usually dial, not usually, but sometimes just dial in a tiny amount to give some sort of movement and modulation. And then you can also add the modulation wheel, vibrato, or whatever. But all this matrix is quite complex, and beautiful things can be done here. And I will explain that in a different tutorial. So, I hope to have mentioned everything relevant for a starting point. As a last thing, yeah, we don't have to save the bank because it's actually already being saved in your DAW project where you were editing it. You should always hit save in your DAW, of course, so that phoneme stuff gets saved with the project. But I would then suggest to actually create a new bank after you finished. Let's call that video to collect, and copy this patch with this button, copy to target. Zack. You see now it has only 127 free. And if you selected this video to collect here, this will be the only patch which is present in that bank. So now you're all safe. You have saved what you've done or what I've done. And this is the end of this tutorial on a Sunday morning. Have fun. Bye bye.